So we just listened to Ookie Ook from the Penguins, and that is vintage 1954-55, more or less. And this is Daniel Vila for WBAI La Voz Latina. And we want to welcome you to our program today. We have a very, very special guest. We feel very honored to have him with us today. Chris Silvera, who presently is Secretary-Treasurer of Teamster Local 808. Their base, I believe, is still in Queens.
Long Island City.
We're going to be talking about that a little bit more detail. But first of all, I wanted to remind our listeners that WBAI is an eternal financial crisis. And we seriously need your collaboration, your financial help. And so we beg you, please, become a member of WBAI. You could do it by becoming a buddy, pledging to give $10, $15, whatever you can, $5 a month to WBAI. And you could do that by going to the website www.give2, that is the number 2, give2wbai.org. And please remember, this station transmits programs which no other station in New York City transmits. It's part of the Pacifica Network, 5 stations. But frankly, the programs on BAI, generally speaking, are much better than most of the programs are on the network. And maybe we could have an argument on that in terms of other Pacifica stations. But La Voz Latina, very, very few programs nationwide on any network that have the type of guests and the type of ideas and political discussions that we have on this program. And La Voz Latina is not an exclusively Latino interview program. We interview people from all nationalities and ethnicities. We do try to give it a specific, more or less, Latino swing. But in any case, we do live in the United States and in New York City, and that is why we are relevant to whatever is in the environment. And at this moment, we do have with us Chris Silvera, as I said at the beginning, who for us is a person that we have known for over 20 years, I believe 22 years, and has been a fighter for workers' rights throughout the city and actually nationwide. And Chris Silvera is now a candidate for president of the Teamsters nationwide. And so I'm going to ask Chris to please tell us more about your campaign, Chris, and give a welcome to our listeners, please.
Hey, it was good to see you, Daniel. And I agree that people should support WBAI. WBAI gives you the type of alternative information that you need to have, which is different from the corporate capitalist radio stations that's really there trying to just sucker you into the system. WBI actually gives you independent information that allows you to think for yourself. So people should definitely participate and support WBI. Separately from that, I'm running for General President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which the Teamsters represent 1.4 million workers that cover everything from UPS, freight, railroads, building maintenance, nurses. We represent truckers, you name it. We police officers, the Teamsters is nurses. We represent a wide array of different classifications of work. My candidacy is to bring to the table a working class perspective, not a bourgeois type of candidacy in which we just negotiate contracts and what have you, but to really bring a bottoms-up, grassroots momentum to strengthen the working class and to build a mass. You know, we need to go after, workers in Amazon and all these different non-union workers to really build the core of the class so that we could move the class forward. Every worker should have a pension, just as a for instance. So to go out here and organize workers, it is important so they can have health care, so they can have pensions, and along with decent wages.
Chris, who is the present president of the union when will the elections take place, and more or less what format will they be? Is this going to be in-person voting? Is it going to be only by the ballot? Is it going to be by internet? A little bit about about that type of perspective.
So currently, the general president is James P. Hoffa, and he has been a general president now for 20 years. Running for office are other candidates as well. You have what they call the Oz slate, which is Sean O'Brien and a gentleman named Zuckerman out of Kentucky. One is out of Boston, the other one is out of Louisville, Kentucky. You have a gentleman by the name of Verma, who is running with a brother named Ron Herrera. They're on another slate. But from my perspective, they don't bring to the table in real terms. They don't have the track record in real terms of the type of relationships within the community, grassroots relationships that actually make other people feel uncomfortable sometimes, you understand what I'm saying? So Local 808 has had a history of that type of relationship in the streets, in the community. I mean, we have marched with the Latin Kings. I mean, we had a demonstration years ago with our late brother up in the Bronx, Ramon Jimenez. And we were actually demonstrating in front of the National Labor Relations Board, and we had the Latin Kings supporting this demonstration.
And I should add also Sisapacari Cultural and Labor Center, which you've supported. Inti Raimi, which is an organization that I'm a member of also.
Right.
You've been president of our activities at the Union Square Park when we've held the Inti Raimi there also.
Exactly. So we have to get into the new cultures in America. You know, we had the Irish, we had the Italians, we have had African Americans and so forth, but there are new immigrants, Ecuadorians, Colombians, Bolivians, you know, all these different new immigrants. I don't consider Cubans to be new immigrants, you know what I'm saying? Cuba's been here for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. But we really have these new immigrants who have not been embraced by the labor movement. You know, sometimes we'll take their dues money, but we haven't embraced them from a cultural perspective so that they would bring to the table their own culture, their own understanding, which makes the labor movement become stronger and broader. You know what I'm saying? Because as you widen that understanding, because people bring from their home countries perspectives. May Day, right, and the value of having a celebration around the 8-hour day. So that's what we want to be a part of. It's a part of trying to change the dynamic of the union.
So that our members, our listeners will have a better idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about the Teamsters Union nationwide. Could you give us an idea of perhaps how many members the union has, or where it's focused, or more where most of its members are, what industries, for example, are unionized, etc.?
Oh, wow. The Teamsters, 1.4 million Teamsters. And we, locomotive engineers, the gentlemen that drive trains in America, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers is affiliated with the Teamsters. The guys that fix the train tracks have affiliated with the Teamsters. Printing, they have affiliated with the Teamsters. If you see a guy at UPS, we represent pilots, we represent police officers, sheriff's department, we represent building maintenance workers. We have workers at the airport who maintain the bathrooms and maintain the building. We have workers in the public sector, New York City Housing Authority. So all the people that maintain the public housing complex here in New York City are Teamsters. Oh my God, I don't think there is a bakeries. I don't think there's a job classification. If you buy Bimbo Bakeries now owns almost all of the bakery products that you see. Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola, Budweiser. You go through the list. Almost everything you touch.
And you have union members in
there are
all
union
of those
members,
right?
Miller Beer, there are union members in all these different points of work.
And I bring that point up because so often, or should I say, so rarely in the press, we hear information about the Teamsters or about any union in the United States, and about the fact that workers there's still millions of workers in the United States represented by unions, and the idea is obviously by the corporate media to make people feel that no, unions are a thing of the past, unions are irrelevant, and actually unions are corrupt. And that's one topic I want to talk about now, corruption in the unions. How do you see that, and how do you think that problem can be solved so that people have at least a less of a sense that unions are corrupt and actually have more confidence in the unions? And is it true? Is there corruption in the union movement, or is it exaggeration on the part of the corporate interests?
I know as a fact that it's an exaggeration. I think anywhere that you scoop up $20, there's the potential for corruption, for somebody to want to steal something, for somebody to want to do something corrupt. There's corruption in the church, there's corruption everywhere, right? So in every facet of life, there's some small percentage of that group that's going to participate in something that is corrupt. But the union, if you did it as a percentage, is probably one of the least corrupt organizations in the country as we speak. But the media, because we have to remember that most media outlet today are controlled by maybe 5 or 6 corporations, if that many. Disney, Scripps, Knight Ridder, and they own almost every newspaper, almost every television and radio station in the country. So when we look at that, there is a war that's taking place against the working class. And people say the union is just the military arm of the working class. Sometimes we abdicate that role, but that's who we really are. And so that there is this battle taking place. And if they can make all the new immigrants that come in, all the people that come here, not know about the union, not be aware of what the union is capable, or how the union is capable of changing their life, the conditions that they work under, then you find that the union becomes weaker and weaker, the class becomes weaker and weaker. And if you would leave it up to the corporate bosses, workers today would live at poverty level and never be able to get a pension, never be able to have full medical care. And that is a battle that the union has to re-energize the movement, re-energize the worker, re-energize 12 million undocumented workers, because they are the allies. People think that they're the enemy. They're not the enemy. The boss who hired them is the enemy, not the undocumented worker. So the labor movement has to embrace the undocumented worker, has to find a way to make one cause with the undocumented worker, so we can build a better future, not just for the immediate workers, but for generations to come.
So the elections, Chris, are going to be then next year, right?
Right. So there's a process that starts by the collecting of signatures. So only Teamsters can sign a petition for you to become. So that's step 1. And that gives you access to the magazine in January. In June of 2021, there's actually a convention, and workers mobilize and vote for delegates to the convention. At the convention, you have to get sufficient delegate votes to be now stamped as a candidate, and then you will be on the ballot in the fall of 2021, when there'll be a mail ballot. There'll be a ballot that comes to your house. And so what we're trying to do is so from the time that this voting started back in 1991, we're probably the only union that has this national election the way we do. I believe we're the only union. We have had less, maybe only the largest amount, I think, was 300 and something thousand Teamsters that have ever voted in our national election, which means that essentially 1 million or more Teamsters have gotten a ballot at home and did nothing at all. Yeah. I'm trying to dig into that group. I have to find out. People say, well, they're all happy, they make good money, they're satisfied. I don't believe that's true. I actually believe that they become disenfranchised, and they actually don't see anything that make them want to do anything. So when they look at both sides, they see, left hand, right hand, but that thing is attached to a body that's not going to do anything different. So why bother? Who cares which hands win? I got a job here, I'm making my money, I'm doing what I'm doing, and I don't care. We have to get that group, because what's going to happen over the next, and we can see the process been taking place for quite some time. We have got to engage this working class, because the future is dark for working people. As more and more of the non-union workforce lose income, lose benefits, and so forth, as that core shrinks and shrinks, at some point, these 10 unions can't defend having a pension, can't defend having health care. It'll be impossible for them to do. And there'll be enough people around them willing to take those jobs working for less, and it'll force them out at some point.
That's incredible. You say only about 300,000 people voted in the elections.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like what happens in the general elections in the United States,
Absolutely.
Where only about half of the people that could be registered that qualify to register to vote. Only about half of the people in the United States are registered to vote, and then of that half, only about half, or a little bit more than half of that registered portion is the one that actually takes part in elections in the United States. So it's always a minority, and usually it's a minority that's dedicated and focused on some candidates, traditionally, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, that vote. In the Teamsters, it's probably the same thing. Maybe many people feel that it's hopeless to go against TAFA, or they don't want to be seen as doing campaign for another candidate, because then they don't want to get in trouble with the bureaucracy or whatever, and then they stay home and shut up. But perhaps with a candidate like you, rank and file candidate, workers will be motivated to vote, and we definitely hope that
right.
happens.
So let me just give you the spread now. So Hoffa is actually going to retire. So
really? So he will not be a candidate?
He will not be a candidate. But so if you go back to the last election, which took place 4.5 years ago, Jimmy Hoffa lost America. This gentleman, Fred Zuckerman, actually won the 50 states. It is Teamsters Canada that provided the margin of victory for Jimmy Hoffa, or he wouldn't be here today. This change would have taken place 5 years ago. The question is, what is the change? Are we just changing who sits in the seat, or are we looking to make a change in terms of the dynamic of the union, right? So that the union has to become engaged with organizations like Sisa Pakati, just as an example. We have to become engaged with community-based organizations that's doing real work on the ground, and some might even say underground, right? Because the undocumented worker is kind of underground, right? And because we have to change the future. And in order to change the future has to become inclusive. This country, people say, oh, Trump, this Trump. Let me tell you something. Trump is actually a blessing, because Trump reveals. See, all the other Republicans, they knew how to keep that cover on what was taking place on the assault on the working class. Trump has actually busted that cover, ripped it apart, and revealed the real assault on the working class. So now, how do we get these people to get up? If you are in a democratic environment, and the Teamsters is supposed to be a democratic environment, each member has a vote, each member can participate, right? If you feel afraid, then you have to stand up for this change, because you shouldn't be afraid in a democratic society, right? You can be afraid in a dictatorial society. You shouldn't be afraid in a democratic society to say, I support candidate A or I support candidate B. And so what we're actually articulating to workers is that when slates are put together, that slate has strengths and weaknesses, right? So on that slate are good union people doing real things. I could think of, I don't know how they end up on these slates, but I think of a guy like Tony Jones out of Ohio, right, who I think is a good union guy, right? He's on a slate, right? You look at another slate, the Verma slate, you have somebody like Bernadette Kelly, I just use one, Ron Herrera, who are probably good union people, with good backgrounds and good histories and what have you like that. So each slate has good candidates on there, weak candidates on there. So we have to go in as individual members, and instead of just marking this box X at the top, and everybody gets that vote, you got to go through and be selective, because you actually want the best team. So we got to look at this vote almost like you're going to draft day in the NFL, and you're looking for the best players to make your team. You see the point I'm saying? So we're telling people, do not vote slate. Vote individual candidates. What is their record? What have they been doing over time? What's the history of these people? Are they talking, or have you seen the track record of the work? Where were they on May 1st? Where were they when the immigrants' rights rally was being fought? You know what I'm saying? You could put out paperwork, but did you offer support? Did you participate, or did you fear the racist element that's in the union movement? Did you fear them so that it paralyzed you from doing anything? And if you feared them, then you also are part of the problem, because that racist element that's in the union, that corrupt element that's in the union, has to be defeated. Every day we go to work, we have to fight against these forms of weaknesses. They're weakening the links, so that if you look at the labor movement as this chain, you can't afford to have any weak links in the chain if you plan on pulling the working class forward.
And it's interesting you say, where were you on May 1st? Because actually you were a founding member of the May 1st coalition. We're not going to get into that right now, but for about a decade, you and Brenda Stokely and other labor leaders, and myself also, and Nellie Bailey and many other rank-and-file people did take part in that coalition. Well, it was a thriving coalition which represented a lot of rank-and-file people, and Chris Silvera, as a member, as the Secretary-Treasurer of Teamster Local 808, indeed was not only a founding member of the May 1st coalition and was mobilizing hundreds of workers to the protests, to the marches, celebrating International Workers' Day, and meeting at most of those demonstrations did meet at congregate and marched from Union Square. Okay, so we are talking with Chris Silvera, who is presently Secretary-Treasurer of Teamster Local 808 here in New York City, and he is running for president, national president of the Teamsters, and we will continue after this musical break.
Oh, I'll love you forever, everything will be fine. Señorita, now that you are mine.
Okay, so we just listened to Big Sandy. That was Big Sandy and Hey Señorita. And actually, that is a remake of a 1954 song of the group that we listened to originally when we started the program. The Penguins recorded it, I think it was 1954. This recording by Big Sandy sounds very much like the original by the Penguins, but he's Mexican-American, and it was recorded about 8 or 10 years ago. And very powerful, very moving song, Hey Señorita. And this is Daniel Vila. You're listening to La Voz Latina on WBAI 99.5 FM. And we again urge you to please support WBAI. Become a WBAI buddy. You can do that by, and that is contributing $10, $15, $20 a month. If you can, only $5, that's cool also. But please support this radio station. This station needs your support. We are in eternal financial crisis until the working class takes power in this country. For the time being, we need your support, and we're going to need it later on also when the working people take over. But in any case, right now, we urge you to go on the website, which is www.give2WBAI.org, and that is with the number 2. Give to WBAI.org. And again, this is Daniel Vila for La Voz Latina, and we're going to continue our conversation here with Brother Chris Silvera, presently Secretary Treasurer of Teamster Local 808 right here in New York City and in Queens still. And I got to ask a question in a little while about the building. Some changes going on over there on Jackson Avenue and Roosevelt. But Chris is running for General President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And Chris, what does that encompass?
That encompasses various trades. We cover the United States, we cover Canada and Puerto Rico. We have locals in Puerto Rico. And we cover everything from railroads, building maintenance, truckers, package car delivery, school bus drivers, you name it. Budweiser, Miller, we represent, we're in the dairy business, we're in the printing industry. The Teamsters is 1.3, 1.4 million Teamsters across the globe.
Excellent, and very powerful. And again, most of our listeners do not hear very much about the Teamsters, and it isn't because you do not exist. It is not because you are not working. It is because the corporate media, with the exception of WBAI, the corporate media out there just censors anything that has to do with the interests of working people, and makes working people feel that unions are irrelevant, they're a thing of the past, and it isn't like that. They're more important, and we'll talk about this in a little while, more important today than ever. Chris, well, we also wanted to go into the matter of the May 1st Coalition and your role in it, and Teamster Local 808. What can you tell us about that?
Right, so, we, in 2004, October the 17th, if I'm not mistaken, 2004, we had the Million Worker March. Mm-hmm. And one of the demands of the Million Worker March, and one of the things that we wanted to do, because we didn't want it to be a march, we wanted it to be a movement, was we wanted to reclaim May Day.
And that was in D.C., Washington, D.C.
Well, a big march in Washington, D.C., right? So we wanted to reclaim May Day. So the following year, in 2005, we had a march from Union Square. Union Square essentially became the headquarters, which it always was, historically the headquarters of May 1st demonstrations going back not hundreds of years, but certainly close to 100 years.
Close to, yeah.
And so we did, 2005 we had a march from Union Square that probably had about 1,500 members, but in 2006 we actually got together with probably 60 plus organizations. Jaime and them came from out in California and what have you, and we built this massive immigrant rights march. In 2006, we probably had, I think it was estimated over 1 million people marched that day. According to the New York City Police, it was the largest peaceful demonstration in the history of New York City. And that is important, because what it says is how many people are concerned. Because this actually was happening in San Francisco and Chicago, all over the country. So it was 1 million people in New York. Probably throughout the entire country, it was millions of people that marched. This is important because this comes to, we have to keep getting workers to stand up, get up. I don't care whether you're undocumented or whatever. We have to recognize workers for being workers. So from that point forward, we actually continued our movement of May Day year after year. Then there was a group that came in that tried to divide the May Day movement, and they developed one that was down at Foley Square. And then in an attempt to not allow it to be divisive, we would march from Union Square down to Foley Square to have a joint rally at Foley Square to keep this from being divided. And that went on for quite many years. In the last few years, I have said to them that May 1st had become uni-focused on immigrant rights to the exclusion of workers' rights. And I said that it could not be, that's not what May 1st stands for. May 1st is global, and May 1st can never be, because the battle of the undocumented worker is a worker struggle. There is no question about that. But it cannot be seen outside of its context. And that context is, how do we make this society, bring these people into the society and recognize them? You understand what I'm saying? But recognize them as workers, not as immigrants, not as this being some kind of legalistic battle about whether you get a green card or not. This is about, why do people migrate to America? Nobody left Ecuador because they didn't like Ecuador. If nobody left Colombia or Italy or Ireland or any of these countries because life was wonderful there. The people that left were the people that were looking for a better way of life. And America has been that beacon to immigrants from its inception. Okay, so the people that left England didn't leave England because they were living in palaces. They left England because they were living in huts. And that goes for the rest of them that have come here. So this is a struggle of workers. So when the May 1st movement got to the point where it no longer seemed concerned about $15 an hour, about people having pensions, about people protecting health care, people protecting, collective bargaining agreements, we could no longer sustain our participation in it because it had lost its focus and just became whether I got a green card or not. And to give that worker a green card and have them come and work for $8 an hour while they're living in New York City or living in Chicago really was not helpful to the class. You understand what I'm saying? So it had to be something, because people say $15 an hour. I don't believe in $15 an hour. I believe in a living wage, because a living wage is different in New York than it is in San Francisco, than it is in Jackson, Mississippi, than it is in Mobile, Alabama. So when you just say $15 an hour is $30,000 a year. After you pay taxes, you still broke. We need to have a living wage where those people can take a vacation every year and enjoy the fruits of labor. Not just working, seeking overtime, having to work a second job or a third job. You need to be able to make your life with one check.
Well, Chris, I don't want to give away my age because that is one of the top military secrets in the United States. So I'm not going to give away my age. But in 1974, when I was in college, and I was working in the sweatshops and I was actually a member at that time of what it was then International Ladies Garment Union.
GW.
I was making $2.25 an hour. Now that sounds like little money, but that $2.25 an hour in 1974 was actually more. I could buy more with that $2.25 than I could today with $15 an hour.
Absolutely.
And what happened is, people don't know it, that a quart of milk used to cost 25 cents.
Yeah.
So did a large glass bottle of whatever soft drink you want to think about that today costs whatever. At that time used to cost 25 cents. The New York City token, yes, there was such a thing as a round metal thing called a token.
That's right.
Look it up on the internet. Mr. Google has all the information. A token was only 10 cents, and then I was freaked out when it went up to 15 cents. I was freaked out.
New York freaked out.
Comic books. My Marvel comic books, Fantastic Four #1 and Hulk #1 only cost 10 cents, and then I was freaked out when they went up to 12 cents. And that's the way things are. So when you say $15 an hour is not a living wage, very true. Today, $15 an hour is less than $2.25 in 1974.
Yeah. I started in the railroad industry in 1978. I had some other jobs before that. I went into the military. I was in the Air Force, came back. And when I started in the railroad, it was $6.48 an hour. And with 1 week's paycheck, I paid my rent. 1 week. Today, workers find themselves 2.5, sometimes 3 weeks of pay just to cover the rent.
Absolutely.
Haven't bought food, can't, because you can't, there's no free TV anymore in reality, right? There's no free TV. Mm-hmm. You got to have a smartphone, right? Which means that you got to have internet connection and all this type of stuff like that. So life has become more expensive.
Exactly.
And then the demands of the society to have things, right? So do you have Nike? Do you have Reebok? You understand what I'm saying? Do you have you don't have any of these things, right? And then when we look at what's happening globally, right? The exploitation of workers globally. We can't just sit here as Teamsters or ILGW, International Ladies Garment Workers, or any union, even construction unions, and not be aware and not only just be concerned, but become participatory in the liberation of workers in Vietnam and in Indonesia and in China and in anywhere where those workers are working at less than a living wage, because again, from country to country, it's a different number. We have to become uber concerned. We don't want to say, I don't get into buy America and tell people you buy union. Step number one. When that's not available to you, buy from countries that provide the workers a high quality standard of living. So if I'm going to buy something that's not made in America, it's not made union, I want to know, is it made in Italy? Is it made in Germany? Is it made in some country, some place where the standard of living is at a particular level? So we have to become very conscious, our members have to become very conscious of how they spend their dollar. When you go to Walmart, right? When you go to Amazon, you are participating in your subjugation as a worker. So you have to, I'm not going to tell you you can totally boycott Amazon, but I can tell you could cut them down 75% and go to your local store, go to your local bookstore, go to your local hardware store. Stop buying from these big box stores that are oppressive to the working class. They have destroyed unions in the warehouse industry, in the garment industry. You go to Macy's and what have you. These used to be union jobs years ago. Yeah. They are now forced to compete with China. And not just China, but with low wage, because China is not necessarily low wage anymore in context, right? So we have to become conscious, and our members have to be conscious of how are you utilizing your money that you make, and are you a participant in your own oppression? You know what I'm saying? Even though you might be making $30 an hour, you know what I'm saying? In fact, if you actually look at economic graphs in terms of what happened to workers' wages, what happened to productivity, and what happened to the income of the chief executive officer of these corporations, what you find out is that from the 60s, workers' wages started to flatline, and productivity kept going up, and the corporate income kept going up, but not the wages of workers. And today, workers' wages are about 35 to 40% below where they ought to be in reality. And this is how you create the billionaire class. Now, you go back 30, 40 years, there were no billionaires. There were multimillionaires. You didn't have this billionaire thing. Every joke is a billionaire. But that's at the expense of the working class. And the working class has to be re-energized. And we have to, in fact, as a labor movement, we have to break with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And the union has to build a workers' party that is unapologetic about its interest in the working class, and break the backs of these other political entities and have a workers' party.
You mentioned, Chris, and I'll just touch this very briefly. The matter for some people may be a little bit controversial when you say that May 1st should not be focused exclusively on immigrants, etc. And me, as a person born in Puerto Rico, absolutely I'm in agreement with that. And many immigrants that I have spoken with are also in agreement with that. And incidentally, I believe you were born in...
I was born in Jamaica. I'm a big immigrant.
Jamaica, so people don't think...
I'm an immigrant through and through. I don't say it shouldn't be focused on immigrants, but not as immigrants, but exactly. Immigrants as workers. Because you still have to be inclusive of the Irish, of the Italians, of the Germans, of the Greeks, of all the other immigrants that are here. So the march cannot be exclusive. The march must be inclusive, and that's what we were battling for. And that's why when we had the split where they went to Foley Square, we didn't want that split to occur. So we would march to Foley Square and have a grand rally at that point. But I said, you can give a guy a green card. You can make him a citizen if you want to, but if his wages is $8.25, he might as well stay underground.
That's right.
You understand the point I'm saying? Because at least he's ducking taxes and what have you like that, trying to make his way through. So we have to be careful about what our demands are. I'm an immigrant. I believe that workers should have the right to march the globe without any restriction, the same way that the dollar. Right. Investments. You can send $10 million right now to any country in the world in 35 seconds or less, right? So why should a worker have to go through all these hoops? As long as you have no criminal record, blah, 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 like that, you should be able to come to the border and say, hey, listen, I'm looking for work. Because that's what capitalism is. Capital is globalizing, but constricting the worker.
Well, that one of the problems that we have is that identity politics. And in fact, we should remind people that originally May 1st began as a result of the so-called Haymarket Riot, 1884, I believe it was. 1886. It was actually on May 4th. But from that tradition, and it was mostly European immigrants. German workers, a lot of them, but what happened? They were not protesting in favor of German rights or Irish rights or whatever rights. They were protesting for American working class rights, as they saw themselves as part more. 2020 is going to be one of those years, sort of like 1968, possibly like 1929, 28, 30. It will go down in history as a pace-setting and pace-breaking a historic year. Many things going on. There was the murder of George Floyd, but it's just one of thousands of murders of black people and people of color, and even white people. In fact, most of the people that are actually killed by the cops are poor whites, and people don't even know that. But unfortunately, the matter with racism is that disproportionately, black people have been killed the most by police, and very often senselessly, with absolutely no provocation. So, what's your take on this year, Chris, and how do you see things shaping up after these elections?
So there's the before the election and after the election, and I think people need to dispense with the idea that the defeat of Trump is somehow going to create some chaotic move in which Trump is going to get out of the White House, and he will be tossed out of the White House. And this one again come back to the working class, right? We have to make a demand. But Biden is only a get rid of Trump guy. Biden is not the answer to the working class, right? The answer to the working class is making a demand that you can enforce, right? And until we build a working class party, then we have to take our power as labor, and that's what I'm talking about, mobilizing even non-union workers. The union is just the military wing, or should just be seen as the military wing of the working class. The same way that Umkhonto we Sizwe was the military wing of the African National Congress, so should the unions be the military wing of the working class. And so that when we make a demand, it's not a demand for our members, it's a demand for the working class. And when we go along that path, then we're going to push Biden and the Democratic Party to our will going forward. So we need to still have real demands. We tried to push when Barack Obama was the president. I love Barack, but I don't love Barack for any other reason other than his ability to have broken through and broke that glass. Now that the glass is broken and we all can march through, we can't just be happy that we put a black guy there, or we put a Latino there, or we put a woman there. That person has to be answering the questions of the working class. You have to be conducive to what it is that our demands are and bringing about solutions. So if we put somebody in office and they're not going to address the living wage, and they're not going to address universal, so I don't even like Medicare for all, because I don't think Medicare is up to snuff. So I talk about universal health care, right? Pensions. Every worker should have a pension. I don't care whether you're at McDonald's. I don't care whether you're in Walmart. I don't care whether you're at Target. You should have a pension. And that's the way it used to be back in the day. We have to get back to why is it and what happened when workers lost such things as retiree medical coverage. So, but see, if you had universal health care, it would actually create an environment where you didn't need to have military, veterans, Medicaid, Medicare. You had universal health care. And that would actually become a cost savings because you didn't have these multiple bureaucracies and paperwork. And we were able to now create the environment that allowed unions to do what unions ought to be doing. We shouldn't be in the healthcare business. That shouldn't be what unions did. That's not the role of a union. But we live in this pirate capitalist society because America is not like a European capitalist society. These suckers is criminals. This is a criminal capitalist society right here. And right now, let me tell you something. You look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is exactly what Don Vito Corleone wanted for his son Michael, that he would have his son Michael be the governor or even the president of the United States, but having an understanding of where he was coming from. They knew that they would be able to take. So people, we are actually, America is in a crisis right now, but we shouldn't be in a crisis of fear. We should be utilizing this crisis to advance the cause of the working class and be pushing forward. And this is what these youngsters are doing. When you see them out there at night marching and demonstrating, it comes from the fact that they have no future. This capitalist society cannot promise them any future that these young workers want, right? So they're going to graduate from college owing millions of dollars, not individually, but collectively. The young workers today are going to be the indentured servants, right? Because they graduate from college. If they're lucky, they only owe $50,000. And it takes you 10, 15 years to pay off the $50,000. So in that 10, 15 years, you can't get a car, barely get a car. You can't buy a house because you're not making $35 an hour. You're making $15 an hour. So you find a lot of kids graduating with college degrees that are making $15, $16 an hour. They don't have the future that their parents had when they graduated from college. And that's why. So we have got to transform this capitalist society into something different. And I'll tell people that socialism is going to look different in America than it does in Cuba and as it does in other countries. It'll be an American style of socialism because we are a wealthy country. You understand what I'm saying? But people have got to make choices. Do you want health care or do you want a submarine? Do you want a pension plan or do you want an aircraft carrier? You have got to make decisions about how the wealth of the society is spent. And the working class, and this is why, when you talk about why am I running for general president, because as the head of a union of an international, we have got to change the conversation that's being held in Washington, D.C. and around the country to become worker friendly.
And you mentioned socialism. As we know, Bernie Sanders was a pre-candidate for president under the Democratic Party. He was, due to a lot of reasons we're not going to get into right now, defeated as not the candidate, but his candidacy did demonstrate, and so did all the polls, that among the majority of younger workers, younger people in America, socialism is an option. For the majority, capitalism is just a bleak future with unemployment, mass unemployment, and economic depression. And we're seeing that already on the wall for the next several years and maybe even a decade of a depression, economically speaking, sort of like the 1929 depression. So that is why, to our listeners that are listening, especially those that are Teamsters and that have the right and the possibility of voting in the next elections, we need a man. We need a man like Chris Silvera to be president of that union, not only because of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, but also because under that type of a leadership, with the ideas that we are listening, we could see also the possibility of a broader coalition led by labor for change of this country. And Chris, we have just 1 minute more left, so I'll leave you with the final word here.
I would tell people, get out and vote, but I'm going to tell you something more important. Don't fear the term socialist. That's what they used to call the people that organized unions in the 1800s and what have you. They call them communists, they call them Reds, they call them socialists. It was not a capitalist that built the union, and it's not a capitalist that's screwing you out of having better wages and better benefits. It's the capitalist that's killing you right now. So don't fear socialism, fear capitalism, because that's what's putting you in jail. That's what promotes police brutality. That's what promotes mass incarceration and voter suppression. Free the people. The power belongs to the people. Vote for change in the Teamsters in 2021.
And again, Chris Silvera running presently Secretary Treasurer of the Teamsters Local 808 here in Queens.
In Long Island City, Queens.
Long
That's
Island
right.
City, Queens. And you are running for what position?
General
Chris?
President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
And that includes the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your presence. We have been honored with your participation in this program, La Voz Latina, Chris, and hopefully we'll have you again in the future before the elections several more times.
You will be here. Thank you very much, man. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Hay sexto sentido y nada más. WBAI de Cuba.